Just beginning on this headline grabber of a potential prison sentence for anyone trying to return from India, was this something the government had to do or wanted to do?
Well, the government always has the ability to put in place a range of measures in these situations. The Biosecurity Act has been in place for a long time. And when you get a pandemic like this, you have to look at a range of measures to see what will work effectively. Now, obviously, this is to act as a deterrent. It's to send a strong signal that nobody should be circumventing what are well-made public health orders, health advice, and what are well-made border restrictions from a country which is very sadly and tragically going through a second wave that is leading to 400,000 cases a day and thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths every single day.
So a lot of people have been upset by this particular deterrent, though. Do you stand by it?
Well, it's a temporary measure, and the government's been clear on that from the beginning. We have to take the time on the health advice that the government's received to ensure that our quarantine arrangements can deal with a new strains of the pandemic, a second wave in one of the world's most populous countries that is ravaging that country, its health system, its people. People are dying. That's the health advice we've received. And Australia has done so well in this pandemic, our national cabinet, our states, our federal government, through some pretty difficult challenges. And I think Australians back overwhelmingly the government, the national cabinet, to make tough decisions when they have to as this pandemic unfolds. It doesn't stay the same. It continues to change in ways that are really upsetting and very unpredictable, but we have to be ready to adapt.
Let me just clarify this, though. Could the government have banned travel back from India without adding on the possibility of jail for someone who does so?
Well, the government has to look at the whole arrangement that we make, and obviously there's the possibility of people coming through different third-party ports. We've spoken at length about that we don't want to see people coming in when we've temporarily paused travel from India and leading to an outbreak or putting pressure on quarantine. So a signal has to be sent. It's been sent. The Prime Minister's been keen to point out we've had similar penalties in place since the beginning of this pandemic.
Was it possible from a legislative, was it possible in terms of the regulation made to do it without the prison sentence, but you wanted to have the prison sentence in there? I'm just trying to clarify the capability here.
Well, we have to take the advice from health officials about the pandemic. We have to make judgments about what deterrence
the health officials said the deterrence wasn't their idea. This was not their rule.
Well, the government only acts on its advice and it looks at all of the measures available to it, including through the Biosecurity Act. And the point is we haven't used jail, state or federally, unless it's been absolutely necessary in some extreme cases. But it's important to lay out what will happen to people. If someone deliberately circumvented our system, if someone went out of their way to return to Australia from India right now without any valid reason and was determined to get through our quarantine arrangements and sparked a second wave here, you would agree that should be a criminal offence. And that's what the government is saying. If you do that, if you breach this temporary ban, then it ought to be.
But that wasn't health advice, was it? That was the government having health advice and deciding the deterrent needed to be criminal and possibility of jail.
Well, the government acts on all of its advice, and of course we have advice from health officials, the Chief Medical Officer, the Department of Health, our officials, our border officials, my department. It's totality of advice received about the risk to Australia and the options to the government in arrangements. But I just point out, Tom, we've also made some pretty important statements about the health changes as well. We're going to need new tests with a new variant. We're going to need to take some time to get quarantine arrangements right. More than half of the cases we're getting through our quarantine now were from India. So there's been a lot of announcements. There's been a totality of announcements, and they're overwhelmingly to the safety and security of Australians.
All right. The justification we heard from Alan Tudge today was the health advice also is that if there's 2% of COVID cases or higher overall in quarantine, that's when the system needs the so-called breather. What percent are we at right now?
Well, we were advised, of course, that this had been on the increase to about 15%. We were advised that over 50% of those, I think it was approaching 60%, were cases from India. And it's tragic what's happening over there, but we have to take account new strains, virulent strains, developments that are happening around the world and adjust our quarantine accordingly. And the government's announced an increase in Howard Springs facility. We'll have 1,000 extra places available per fortnight that will be available. We'll be able to set that up in a way that will be able to deal with what we're seeing in India. And that's why we have a pause. This isn't a ban that we've said any further than May 15, other than on the advice. We have to get the quarantine ready, and it is a temporary pause of arrangements while we get that in place.
But just the 2%, so that is seemingly the rule. This is the first time I think we've heard of that. 2% of quarantine overall positive is when the systems can't cope. Have we been above 2% previously in the pandemic at any point?
Well, variously, of course. The government has been meeting through its mechanisms, the National Security Committee, virtually every week since the beginning of this pandemic, Tom. Many meetings. And certainly in some I've been in, it's been more serious or less serious. We've had a wave in Victoria. We've had all sorts of situations change. This has fluctuated, all the time. And people have got to remember that this is just because things have gone very well here for a period of time, life is normal. We are living a life that no one else, no other country is. It doesn't mean the government and its agencies and all our officials and our health system and our states are all working pretty much around the clock to keep it that way through our quarantine and health and other systems. And this figure does move around.
But I'm just asking if it's gone above 2% previously to this time.
Well, I can find you the exact answer of how many times. I'm not in every single one of the meetings, but the point is about that. It's fluctuated throughout the course of this pandemic, like everything, Tom. Everything is fluctuating, and India did.
I understand that, but if it's gone above 2% before, the question is why this measure hasn't been taken before. Why it's just for India?
Well, this is the problem that we get with some of the commentary about this, and it's no reflection on you. There's plenty of public commentary about one factor or another factor. There are multiplicity of factors to consider about a country, the strength of its health system, its logistics, what is actually happening, its vaccination rollouts. We don't get one piece of advice. The government receives expert advice from the Chief Medical Officer and all our agencies about the totality of the situation and the risk associated with the totality of the situation. And that varies by country, it varies by what's happening, it varies by strain of the pandemic. And I don't think people can be expert commentators based on one fact that they might have learnt in a newspaper. They have to be able to assimilate all the advice. And that's why we have a government, that's why we have a national cabinet.
It sounds like it's gone above 2% before, but you're saying that's not the only trigger point.
Well, I'm saying it is a complex matter. We've all been learning about the pandemic as we go. If you rewind 1 year, we know 1 year's less information about the disease, about the vaccination, about everything. You can't, at one point in time now, suggest that we knew everything we knew back then. It's been a very complex web. But people can rest assured that we've got the best health experts in the world advising government. And they've done an excellent job in protecting us. And that's why we're in the excellent situation that we're in.
Just finally, was there any consideration when this was brought in that as a result, Australians still stuck in India could die as a result of getting COVID and the overwhelmed health system in India?
Well, look, in this 1 in 100 year pandemic, the threat of death has been prevalent the entire last 18 months, every single decision the government makes, and none of them are easy. They're all tough, Tom. Even allowing people to travel outside of the country, on urgent and necessary reasons. People know they're taking a risk moving to other countries. So it's never not present, Tom. It's always present in every single decision that the government's been making. And I think we've been taking overwhelmingly the right decisions to protect our country. I think we've also been looking out for our citizens as best as possible in other countries as well. This is about getting repatriation flights back up and running with an increased volume in a safe way that will not threaten a second wave in Australia. And that's what we're taking the time to do.